Running. All right, welcome back to another fun installment of Sanhedrin. We are back down in the weeds, in the nitty-gritty. This week we're starting up with Sanhedrin chapter 8, Mishnah number 6, which, deals with one of the aspects of Jewish law regarding robbery or theft. There's an English term which I'm not as good about. Theft is when you steal without the owner's knowledge, and robbery is when you steal with knowledge, I believe. I think there is a distinction, or is burglary the one when you steal when no one's home? And there's some English definition of, thief, burglar, robber, that kind of thing. And in this particular issue, we're dealing with the tunneling thief. We're going to go ahead and use whatever English word I come to mind. The tunneling thief, where you've got a house and the guy breaks into your house, and you could very easily break apart the plaster and remove some of the rocks, and you're in through the wall. It's easier than drywall. Studs are narrow. And that is what we're dealing with. And when he does that, he gets stopped. When do you get to use lethal force? This is a topic that comes up an awful lot in discussions recently, in Florida in particular, because of the castle doctrine. Your home is your castle was a doctrine in American law widespread for many, many years, where anybody who comes onto your property, you can't necessarily do whatever you like, but the law does tend to creep that way. If you feel threatened and you respond accordingly, it doesn't matter what their intent was, you are exonerated for defending what you thought was under attack. And then, of course, in Floridian law, that got projected as not just in your home, but even on the street. If you feel threatened, you can respond with deadly force if necessary. And if you can convince the authorities that you felt threatened, not even necessarily that you were justified to feel threatened, then you can be exonerated for using lethal force. Very controversial in the modern world. A little bit clearer in the ancient world. One of those things. All right, so 8.6, let's see how the Mishnah handles this question. You can look up in Exodus 22, as the comment says, if you want to read the original discussion in the Torah of this tunneling thief.
Mishnah, Mishnah 6?
Mishnah 6, part 1.
Part 1. The thief who burrows his way into someone's home is judged on account of his outcome.
All right, so this was a little bit of this is a follow-up on something we began last week, with the idea that with the Ben Surah Moreh, the rebellious child, that even though they had not done something in and of itself that was worthy of a capital punishment, they had so clearly demonstrated that that was the direction that they were headed, that capital punishment was appropriate for them. And they said that's because you're being judged now for the inevitable outcome. And remember, of course, in that case, the inevitable outcome was very clearly laid out by the narrow construction of what the person had to do to be classified as the rebellious son. Here, the sages as well want to know, why do I get to kill someone who came into my house? I mean, he hasn't done anything yet except break a hole in my wall. You're not allowed to kill someone for taking property. You're not allowed to kill someone for vandalism. So why am I allowed to kill this person? And in this particular case, it's because of the outcome. The assumption is that if the person was breaking into your home at a time when you are home, that he already had in mind to commit violence and possibly lethal violence against the occupant. Right? No one breaks into a house knowing that the owners are home and knowing that the owners are going to catch him. This is, again, ancient world. We're not talking about 50-room mansion where they can break into one wing and you're in the other wing. This is essentially a few rooms maybe, or one-room house. You come in through my wall. We know there's going to be a tussle. You've already shown your intention to injure and or kill me by coming through my wall. Therefore, I am allowed to do to you before you do to me. Is the justification that the Mishnah is explaining here. So I can stop him with lethal force. If I stop him with non-lethal force and he is stopped, the Torah is very clear, and the rabbis ratify it, you are not then allowed to execute him or to take his life with your own hands. So even though you had a window of opportunity where you could kill him in the process of stopping him from doing what he was planning to do, once he is stopped, you're not allowed to re-engage that lever of permission to execute him on the spot or to hand him over to the authorities who will execute him. You hand him over and he's simply prosecuted as a thief.
In modern times, would that be sort of, if I caught somebody breaking into my house and I got my gun, but he saw me, ran out and was running down the road, I can't then shoot him?
Okay, indeed, the modern conundrum, and one which courts have been ambivalent over, but Judaism is a little bit clearer, is that if the person is clearly fleeing from violence and poses no threat to you anymore, you are not allowed to use lethal force after that fact. Because what are you stopping them from doing? They're from running away? That you don't need to stop someone from running away. You just let them run away. If you can stop them and bring them to justice with non-lethal force, you're perfectly fine. And in fact, in the codification, in Shulchan Aruch and other codes of Jewish law, it says that if you see somebody who is, we're going to get this in just a moment, see someone who is about to commit certain types of crimes and you need to stop them. The most famous example, kids next door. Most famous example is murder. You are obligated to stop them with the least lethal means available. If there is no least lethal means available, then you are allowed to kill them. But you do have a hierarchy if you have options. So if you're sitting there and you've got a lever that will drop them down into a trap, and there's a nice, springy floor, but they will be stopped and the person will live, and you've got another lever which will drop a 2-ton weight on them, you have to pull the non-lethal lever. And you don't get to say, well, I'm stopping a murderer. No, you stop him in the least lethal way possible. Least lethal. Wow, that's hard to say. Okay, keep going.
If he burrowed his way in and broke a jug, should there be blood guiltiness for him, he must pay for the jug. But if there is no blood guiltiness for him, he is not liable.
Okay. Well, it does, right? So blood guiltiness is basically what they're trying to say, is that if the the householder, right, the guy who lives in the house, if he kills him along while the guy is breaking into the house, then the householder, as we said, is allowed to do so because he is projecting this intention. But if in the process that is happening, and the thief is killed, you don't charge for the damages that were also committed in the carrying out of his crime.
I mean, you don't charge the thief's family for
exactly. You don't put a lien against his estate for the damages that he committed. The guy's dead, that's it. Which is, kind of interesting, because in general, we would think you commit transgression A and you commit transgression B, you should be punished for transgression A and transgression B. We're going to see explicitly in maybe a few minutes, we'll see how our time goes, that doesn't always work, that sometimes you just get punished for one, even if you committed multiple crimes.
It seems to me that if you're the householder, someone breaks into your house, you don't have a lot of time to decide what evil intention they're going to have, and you would want to stop them as strongly as you could, I would think, and not say, oh, well, maybe he's really a good person, I'll just put my hands down my side, see what he does next. I don't see how you can ask somebody to make those kinds of decisions and not make the wrong one.
Just you wait.
Oh, okay.
Well, because we're going to get in a second. In the Torah, the dividing line between knowing the intention of the thief and not knowing the intention of the thief is whether it is daylight or nighttime.
Oh.
If the thief breaks in during the daytime, the assumption is that he was coming into the house knowing that no one would be home, or thinking no one would be home, and therefore he is not already primed for violence. He is a sneak thief. Whereas if he comes in at night, what do you expect but to find people sleeping in their house? That's where people are during the night. During the day, everybody was working. You didn't just lounge around watching TV. So the idea that your home would be empty during the day was a pretty safe assumption. That's why thieves would rob during the day. But if they come in at night, then they've already made up their mind to do battle with the occupants should they be noticed. So that's what the Torah describes, and that's what the Mishnah is. But the idea of intent is going to come back with a vengeance in a couple Mishnahs. All right, 8-7. Now we get tricky.
Oh, no. The following can be saved from sinning even at the cost of their lives.
All right, let's make sure we understand the introductory phrase here. You can be stopped from sinning even if I've got to kill you.
Oh,
right?
He's coming into my house.
No. We're talking about other categories now. We're moving away from the sneak thief, but we're going to see a category of people or categories that if you see them about to commit these crimes, you must stop them, even if it means killing them. And the issue here, of course, is that they have not yet committed the crime. So it's going to be a little tricky. Hold on to your seats.
You've seen the movie Minority Report?
The movie Minority Report, yes, excellent idea here.
Bureau of Pre-Crime.
Yes, it's the Bureau of Pre-Crime. Although this is a much narrower range of things that they will be handling.
So if you see someone who is pursuing after his neighbor to slay him, or pursuing after a male to rape him, or pursuing after a betrothed maiden to rape her.
Right. In the original Mishnah, the words "to rape" are not there, but it is absolutely categorically implied by all the way that this plays out, as well as every commentary ever written, including the Talmud itself. So these three categories: you see someone chasing someone else with a knife, you see someone chasing someone else saying, "I'm going to rape you," and you're standing there and you've got a sniper rifle, and that's all you've got, and there's no other way to stop them except to kill them. You are allowed to kill them. Someone is running after someone else saying, "I'm going to steal your money," and all you've got is a sniper rifle. You don't kill them. You can't stop someone at the expense of their life for a property issue. But we're going to see things that you might think we would otherwise do are in part 2, and yet we don't.
But he who pursues an animal to have relations with it, or one who would violate the Sabbath, or commit idolatry, must not be saved from sinning at the cost of his life. Right?
So one of the most important ideas in all of Judaism, the prohibition on idolatry. See my sermon from last week. You see someone saying, "I'm going to go worship Baal." You know, and I've got my sheep here, and I've got my Baal prayer book, and I'm going to go bow down to this idol, and it's going to be a jolly good time, and all sorts of other things. Then I reject God, etc., etc. And you've got your sniper rifle. You let them go. You give them warnings. If witnesses are present, they warning, and they will testify to what they saw this person do, and then they can be executed by the court for having committed idolatry. But you are not allowed to kill them before they commit those crimes. The only 3 are, well, really 2 that are 1, is you can stop someone before they rape, and you can stop someone before they murder. Any other transgressions they are allowed to do, and by stop, I mean lethal stop. You are allowed to stop people in non-lethal means, right? Someone's trying to break into someone else's house. You are perfectly able and welcome to call the police or in other ways deter them from doing that, but you're not able to just murder them. Make sense?
Wow.
So the defense of how they call it here, that if somebody comes to your house, you have the right to kill.
The castle doctrine, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
doctrine.
Well, the castle doctrine does have some grounding in Torah and Mishnah, but it is much narrower. It's not as free-for-all as it is in, well, at least the way most American law has been currently interpreted, especially famously here in Florida. So yeah, it's taking another life, even the life of somebody that is clearly about to commit a sin, is a big deal. And you're allowed to stop, but you are not allowed to kill someone except for those 3 cases. Now, what do we notice about those 3 cases? The ones that you are allowed to stop someone.
You're going after a person.
Exactly. There's a victim.
There's a victim. That's right.
Right. If someone commits idolatry, yes, the person is their own victim and they are committing a great sin, but they are not taking the life or ruining the life of someone else. Pardon my phone. On the other hand, when you murder someone, that you are allowed to stop someone rather than trading their life for someone else's life. And so too, rape was considered that serious that you could stop someone with lethal force if necessary to prevent them from doing that.
Mhm. So if you saw somebody trying to break into someone else's shop to steal their stuff, you may not kill them for that. 'cause
Correct. You can
that
stop them any other
some
non-lethal
other
way.
way.
Absolutely.
But not after another person.
And if you got your handy sniper rifle, you're even welcome to go and say stop. And you know, you can threaten, and hopefully they don't know Jewish law, and get them to stop. But you're not allowed to just go punk and pluck them off. Whereas for these other categories, for murder and rape, you are. So Judaism straddles this very unusual spot in philosophical territory, because oftentimes you will have very strict non-passive, non-aggressive positions, pacifist positions that say, I will not take the life of another person at all, under any circumstances, total and complete pacifism. And you have others that will take a position that is, hey, if I feel threatened, if there's danger going on, or if I can stop someone before they commit a crime, then it's a benefit to the society, and it's their bad luck that the only way I had to stop them was lethal. They were about to commit a crime, they were in the process, that's good enough for me. Judaism sits here and says, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. There are certain cases where we will use lethal force, even though the person has not yet committed the crime. And then there is the much, much larger case of things where we will not use lethal force to stop them because they haven't committed the crime. Notice again, one other interesting thing here when dealing with this question of preemptive or zealous action. In Jewish law in general, there is an accepted principle that under most circumstances, if you are being asked to violate a transgression under a penalty of death, that is to say, there's a malevolent government that says, break this commandment or else I kill you, you are supposed to break the commandment. Someone shows up, knocks on your door and says, hello, I'm your local tyrant, and I would like you to have a ham sandwich today. If you don't, I will shoot you. Jewish law says, have the ham sandwich. Right? A tyrant shows up and says, by the way, I'd like you to weed my garden. It's Shabbat. Get out there and weed my garden. You weed the garden. There are three categories where when the tyrant says do it, you say, I'd rather die. And those are murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry. And yet idolatry falls off the list. So there is one thing to be said for when you are willing to hand over your own life to martyrdom in these cases. And there's something else to be said for when you voluntarily martyr someone else. That is to say, shooting that guy. You are allowed to martyr yourself in those three cases. You are not allowed to voluntarily martyr someone else for idolatry. You can, however, save them by removing them from this world should they be doing these other acts which have the victims. And do notice the language is about saving the criminal. You are saving them from committing the sin. They will die without the stain of being a murderer on their soul. So it's a win-win. Someone doesn't die and they don't become a murderer, and it's all good. And it's not good. Just trying to raise the mood a little bit. It's a heavy topic.
Are we going to get lighter now or not?
No, not so much. Yeah, we're going to get into. We've been dealing with people who are stoned. Now we're dealing with people who are burnt and decapitated. So that's going to really pep up the room. It is, however, sometimes I think it not necessarily humorous, but reassuring that humanity has been very creative and inventive when it comes to injuring each other for a very, very long time. And we have had to work out ways to deal with this. We'll see there are some interesting methods of murder in the next Mishnah.
Are these methods that Jews did carry out, or they're nice theories, but we never actually did them?
You mean the executions?
Yeah.
Oh, the executions absolutely were carried out.
The way this says.
Which way?
The following are burned.
Yes. Now, we did learn, and I think you may not have been with us when we did that, we did learn that burning doesn't mean tie to a stick and put wood at the bottom. It means, at least in the Talmud's final analysis, taking molten metal and pouring it down the gullet, so that the person is killed. It's not worse. It may sound more
I don't
gruesome.
know which is worse.
Well, which one suffers the least?
That's a good question.
Right? If you have the molten burning substance going straight into your organs and incinerating them as it goes, you're dead in an instant. On the other hand, if you are burning on a stake, the fire has to go through all of your skin before it damages anything permanently. It is much more agonizing. Yeah. So if I had to pick,
Yeah, right.
burn me from the inside out.
Scylla and Charybdis. Okay.
It's not a choice I'd like to make,
No.
but
Never should
the rabbis, again, very famously, we mentioned this before, said that the phrase "to love your neighbor as yourself" means choose the form of execution that is most befitting and kind to the person.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
The following are burned. He who has sexual relations with a woman and her daughter, and a priest's adulterous daughter.
Those are the only two that are mentioned as being burned in the Torah.
It's all at the same time.
What's that?
Oh,
Ba-dum-bum.
Orgy.
Yes. Yeah, it's an either or category. It's not, you have to fulfill all those conditions simultaneously. Okay, keep going.
So that was an either or, right?
Right, yes. If you are with the mother and the daughter,
At the same
or a priest's daughter who is committing adultery.
which means she's a willing participant.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, willing is always implied. Otherwise, the Torah is extremely explicit, and the rabbis reinforce that the victim of rape, even if she were married, is not considered to be adulterous. There are no honor killings in Judaism.
Included in the prohibition of having relations with a woman and her daughter are his own daughter, or his daughter's daughter, his son's daughter, his wife's daughter, and the daughter of her daughter or sons, his mother-in-law, her mother, and his father-in-law's mother.
All right. So just in case you were trying to look for a loophole, oh, we got someone at the door. That door sticks, probably, and that door locks. So just in case you were looking for a loophole for somebody that would fit the category of your fantasy but not get you burned, the rabbis come to spell it out that no, everybody who falls into even the broadest definition of these categories are off limits. Do not be doing it. Okay? Okay.
Now, if you had these kind of prohibited relations with a woman who was not in any way related to you, but if she's betrothed to someone, if you took a virginity, that would also,
Those are also problems.
those are also problems.
Right.
Right.
Now, if you are a serial philanderer with women that are not related to you and not related to each other, then you are not liable for the death penalty. You are certainly liable to reprimand for lots of other problems, but it's not a capital crime. Part two? Yeah.
The following are decapitated: a murderer and the inhabitants of a city subverted into worshiping idols.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the guy who actually does the seducing of the city in a previous Mishnah, and now we're talking about the inhabitants of the city that went along with it, and the whole city converted over to idolatry. There is some debate in the Talmud about whether or not this ever happened and was put into practice, but it is on the books, and so, of course, the Mishnah has to discuss it. So if you're a murderer, you die by head being removed. And if you are part of this mass cult movement to idolatry, that is your end as well.
A murderer who slew his fellow with a stone or iron, or kept him down underwater or in fire so that he could not get out of there, is executed.
All right, so this is playing a little bit on a section of the Torah that we read quite recently, last week, in fact, dealing with the difference between murder and manslaughter. And the Torah makes a distinction between hitting someone with an implement of iron or stone and hitting somebody with an implement of wood or with a fist. With the idea being that some implements of wood are not going to be lethal. Some implements of your fist are not going to be lethal. Some are. So maybe you weren't intending to kill when you gave them a whack, as opposed to stone and iron, which are almost always designed to take life, and therefore you can't just give a gentle whack and not be surprised when the person dies. So if you hit them with a lethal implement, would be one way of translating it, or you keep them in water and fire long enough to die, then you are absolutely categorically a murderer, and you will be decapitated, executed in that manner. However,
Which sounds like a fine punishment as far as I'm concerned. If you've done that to somebody, who carried out these punishments?
So different punishments were carried out in slightly different ways. So, for example, the stoning punishment, very famously, is carried out first and foremost by the witnesses against them. They are the ones who give him the knock off the cliff for him to fall.
Oh.
Yeah, stoning was a cliff. It wasn't a bunch of people with rocks.
But if someone were going to be decapitated,
then usually that was an agent of the court that would
and we
have
never
the skill.
actually had our own country that we could do those.
Of course we did.
We did.
During the days of Joshua, judges, the prophets, and the kings, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So now we have the stone, the iron, the water, the fire. If he pushed him into water or fire, but he could get out of there, yet he died, he is not liable for the death penalty.
All right. So I meant it was a joke. I didn't mean for you to. It's a question again. Under Jewish law, the rabbis are very loath to execute anybody who is not categorically, undeniably, 100% responsible for the death of that person. And if I push a guy into the bonfire, and then I step back, theoretically, under some circumstances, he could have escaped. Now, there are many other circumstances where he couldn't, and I'd be perfectly liable as a murderer for not. I would be liable for other penalties. Very important for a large section of what we're about to read, that just because you don't get executed doesn't mean you get off scot-free. Right? At the very least, I am responsible for manslaughter, which doesn't carry capital punishment, but does carry exile, basically. And I would also be, of course, responsible for the damages that I have rendered to this person and their family. But taking my life, we have a very high bar before you take somebody's life. And just being an accessory to their murder, you have not crossed that bar of being guilty enough to be executed.
If he set a dog or a snake against him and they killed him, he is free from death.
Again, doesn't mean he's free, but it means he's not executed. Because, again, he did not wield the deadly implement, and he may or may not have intended it to be lethal. He may or may not have expected it to work out the way it was. He might have only intended to hurt the person. And I know that sounds like no justification. None at all. Well, we're going to see more in a couple Mishnah.
We don't know what his intent was,
right,
necessarily.
Remember when we were talking about the tunneling thief, the intent, the implied intent of the thief is what gives permission for the homeowner to kill that thief. If he comes in during the day, the assumption is the thief is just as surprised that the homeowner's there as the homeowner is that the thief is there. And the thief had no intention of inflicting any harm. That's why he came when he thought no one would be there. And therefore, you don't have permission to just kill him unless he gives indication that he is going to fight against you. If he gives indication that he's going to fight you, you can defend yourself as necessary. But if he just, opens up the door, the rubble, and crawls in, and he's got no weapons on him, and he's just going, all right, oh, you're home, you do not get to just go slam and cut off his head. You can hold him there, you can wait for the authorities, all those other good things, but you don't just get to say, you came through my wall, I can kill you if I want. Doesn't work like that.
I don't want to belabor the fine points, but I would think if I had a boa constrictor and I set it against you, what do I expect? It's going to lick you and say, hi, nice to see you?
Well,
somehow that's...
Boa constrictors do sometimes do that. They use them in movies all the time. I mean...
If I set a snake against you, okay. Oh.
Keep going?
Yeah, keep going, yes.
Yeah, it's going to get even more tricky in just the next Mishnah or two.
Okay, the rabbis had okay. If he caused the snake to bite him, Rabbi Judah ruled that he is liable for the death penalty, and the sages rule that he is not. All
right, so the sages even push it further. He's not only got the snake going for you, but he's deliberately provoking it to bite you. Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, yeah, we've crossed the threshold now. You're using the snake as a deadly weapon. And the rabbi said, no, it's still the snake doing all the work.
Oh, that's the way out, because it's the snake that's actually doing the killing.
So let me give you an example that, again, is very different in many ways, but still similar in our gut reaction. You have a hitman, and they take money to go kill Mr. X. And you catch the hitman, and you catch the guy who hired him. Should they receive the same punishment? Right? The guy who hired him did not pull the trigger, but he did pay for the trigger to be pulled. What do you think?
Even
What's that?
they both guilty.
They're both guilty of something.
Yeah.
But are they both guilty of the same crime, and should they both be, under Jewish law, executed?
I say yes,
Yeah.
Okay. Jewish law disagrees with you.
probably.
Yeah.
But that's right.
And we're going to come back to some of the modification at the edges of some of these issues. But Jewish law basically says no, because nobody can be forced to commit a deed against their will. The hitman had the right and the ability to say no. Therefore, the ultimate chain of responsibility begins and stops with him. He's the one who pulled the trigger. The person would be alive were it not for his trigger. The money did not kill him. The money may have influenced his choice, but the money didn't kill him. The pulling of a trigger killed him.
Yeah, but I had to speak to 4 different hit guys before I got someone to do it.
You're right, which only proves my point, that it was dependent on the
But I'm
hitman.
going to keep going until I get one who will do it.
But here you have intent.
You have intent to kill, but you are not the
You're not
instrument
the one.
of the death.
Oh,
And that instrumentality and intent are going to come back in just a few minutes. So save your outrage until we're done with a little, until we're done with a little bit more.
Number 4, if a man struck his fellow, whether with a stone or with his fist, and the experts declare that he would die.
This means that you smack someone either with your fist or a lethal implement, and he's laying in bed, and everyone goes, "Oh man, he's gone or he's dead. He's going to go." Keep going.
But then its effect lessened so that it was thought he would live, only to increase subsequently so that he did die, then he is liable.
Okay, so we got this.
Oh,
You get a medical assessment after the attack, and everyone thinks this person is going. He's going, right? It's his time. He got beat up too badly. But then the next day, he's sitting up, he's taking nourishment, he's looking better. And then a couple of days later, all of a sudden, he goes and dies anyway. The question is the person who beat him guilty of murder or not? Because he got a little better, so maybe what he died from wasn't from the abuse. And, the experts were wrong. And the Mishnah is saying, no, he is still guilty of murder, because there is still enough of a chain of causality between the attack and the expiration, and the idea that the attack was lethal enough that it was expected to cause the death, that we do not exonerate him just because the death took longer than expected. Rabbi Nehemiah is going to give a different opinion.
Rabbi Nehemiah said that he is exempt, since there's a strong possibility that the person did not die as a result of his injuries.
Right. So that's a minority opinion, and he isn't. But again, we see that the rabbis are all debating about this line of how much certainty do we need before we execute someone. And maybe it's a good idea to come back to a simple way of looking at this from the rabbi's point of view. One person is dead, and we know that is not something that God likes. We have to be really, really sure before we add another body to the pile, because we know that's not what God wants either. God wants us to carry out justice, but adding a body to the pile is something we have to be especially careful of, because this time we have a choice. The person who was committing the person who was murdered had no choice, and that act has already been done, and that was beyond the community's control. But this death, the death of the possibly condemned man, that we have a say in, and we want to carry out justice, but we have to be absolutely sure that we err on the side of caution before we add to the body count. And that's something that our guts often recoil against, because sometimes it's so cut and dry, so obvious that this person deserves the penalty of death for what they did, that we want to string them up. And Judaism constantly says, rein it in. Rein it in. You need more than your gut before you take someone's life. All right. Now you get to be really, really upset.
Oh, gosh.
Your gut's going to really disagree with this Mishnah. Mishnah 2 from chapter 9.
If he intended to kill an animal, but killed a man, or he intended to kill a non-Jew and he killed an Israelite, or if he intended to kill a prematurely born child who was bound to die in any case, and he killed a viable child, he is not liable.
Okay. So anyone want to leave the room before we?
Yeah.
Let's take this apart. First part, maybe it's the easiest. I'm out hunting with my best friend, and I'm taking aim. I know we don't usually hunt in Judaism, but work for the metaphor. And I am taking aim, and I go bam, and I miss the deer, and I hit my dear friend. Am I guilty of murder?
No.
Why not?
It wasn't intended,
but I was wielding deadly force.
but he didn't intend to kill the man.
Okay, and the object of my intent, the original object of my intent, of my deadly force, I'm permitted to kill. Right? So it's something that is permissible to kill, and I'm wielding deadly force nonetheless, and then I hit something I'm not permitted to kill, I am exonerated from murder. Still responsible for manslaughter, et cetera, et cetera. Right, we're dealing here with just the threshold of capital punishment. All right, now let's make it more complicated. Yes.
This makes it sound as if it's okay to kill a prematurely born child.
We're going to get there. We got to deal with the non-Jew first.
Okay.
Okay, and then we're going to get to ancient medical practices and such. Non-Jew. Are Jews allowed to kill non-Jews according to Jewish law?
I missed that one.
No. But Jewish law and Jewish jurisdiction only extends over people of the covenant, which means that Judaism cannot adjudicate. Oh, that's a pun. We cannot render a legal verdict over actions involving non-Jews. There are some cases where it can happen. It gets really, really complicated. But in general, it doesn't fall under the umbrella of things that our courts are going to be focusing on. So if I was intending to kill somebody that was outside this jurisdiction, their jurisdiction would handle it rather than mine. And because I ended up killing an Israelite who would be under my jurisdiction, I'm still not liable. Because the object of my intent, even with my lethal ability, was beyond the scope of my own prosecutorial setting. Now, can the non-Jewish community deal with me? Almost certainly they would have, but Jewish law would not. So that's a little bit confusing, and it has to do with the way that Jewish law was divided between the home and away legs in the ancient world, between non-Jew and Jewish realms of authority. But let's get to the one that seems a little bit more surprising. Intended to kill a prematurely born child, and instead killed a viable child. Premature children are fair game for killing? Not exactly. Again, we're talking about, in all three cases here, things you ought not to be doing in most cases. Animal is a little bit fuzzy depending upon how you define that circumstance. But the question is whether it's a capital crime. Non-viable children, which all premature children were considered to be in the ancient world, were not considered to have demonstrated sufficient self-sufficiency to the point that any violence rendered against them would be considered the cause of their death, because they were going to die anyway. Now, we have a very different view of what premature children are like in today's society. Speaking as a premature child, we have a very different view because we now know that children can be born months early of the normal due date. And thanks to our medicine and technology, we can keep them alive and they can end up doing just fine for the rest of their life. There is no such thing as a non-viable premature child in the modern society, at least within our own Western society, thanks to our medicine. But in the ancient world, even though the child looked alive, its legal status was as though it had already died. And you were simply waiting for nature to take its course. There was literally nothing to do. And you knew that child would die. It was just a matter of time. It's really painful for us to even imagine a circumstance where a legal decision would have to be made like that. But that was an important distinction in the ancient world between viable and non-viable infants. And we can be very thankful that we're no longer living in a cultural setting where that is true. So that's not so much a eternal legal category. That is to say that not all premature children for all time would fall into this category. It was a culturally bound category, given the complete lack of medical skill to rescue a child that was born before they were viable outside the womb. Okay, but that's not the most shocking part. Oh, good. The other things are going to be shocking for different reasons, but let's see. Okay, we're going to have to do these carefully.
Number 2.
Yes.
If he intended to strike him on his loins, and the blow was insufficient to kill when struck on his loins, but struck the heart instead, where it was sufficient to kill, and he died, he is not liable.
Okay. Stick figures to the rescue. All right, and I'm going to be making up, actually I'm going to need my extended stick figure for this, aren't I? I'm going to be making up figures here and numbers. Please talk to a medical professional before you use any of the information. All right, so I am throwing 2 rocks. And the first rock is being thrown with, let's call it 50 newtons of force, which I don't think is lethal, but let's just imagine it's lethal. So I'm throwing it with 50 newtons of force. And the groin area needs, let's make sure I got the right, because we're going to be going back and forth with some of these. So the lethality, right, this is the lethal force needed depending upon the location. The lethality for the groin, let's call that 100 newtons. And the lethality for the heart, let's call that 50 newtons. The heart is weaker than the loins, right? If you get stabbed in the heart, you're going to die much faster than if you get stabbed down below. Loins, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean just the nethers. It's that region. So I throw a rock with 50 newtons, and I'm aiming for that area. And if I hit, it's not going to kill him, right? It's insufficient to kill should it strike the intended target. But I slip and instead throw it and hit him in the chest, and 50 newtons is enough to trip the heart, and boom, down he goes. I am not liable for murder as a capital crime. Again, all sorts of other laws that are being tripped here, and I am in trouble for. But when it comes to me being executed, it's not going to happen. Why not? Intent, exactly. So it's intent and the lethality of my attack, right? I was attacking an area with insufficient lethality. So you cannot assume that I wanted the person dead. And if I didn't want the person dead, then I'm not a murderer. I'm a killer, but I'm not a murderer. And only murderers get executed. Now, you might say, I know I did when I first read this, but you were still throwing a rock at me. That's still, it's your bad luck that you hit the heart? No, it's my bad luck that I hit the heart. I'm the one dead. So what do I care where you were aiming for? Why should you get off the hook for my murder just because you had bad aim? But our gut reaction of wanting vengeance and someone to pay for this terrible crime is pushed aside by Torah and our Mishnah's analysis of the Torah that says, if it wasn't murder, I can't execute him. No matter how bad he did something, no matter how big a mistake he made, if it wasn't trying to be lethal, then it's not murder, even if the end result was death. And that's hard. That's hard to deal with. Again, doesn't mean the person gets off scot-free. This is not the difference between capital punishment and no punishment. It's capital punishment and non-capital punishment. All right, let's do a few more examples of how we play this game.
This is 2A. If he intended to strike him on the heart, where it was sufficient to kill, but struck him on the loins, where it was not sufficient to kill, and yet he died, he is not liable.
All right, so now the flip side, or one of the flip sides. Okay, let me. I am using 50 newtons of force, and I am aiming for the heart. If it hits, he's a dead man. But I slip, and it goes down low. He shouldn't have died, but some fluke happened, and he did die. Right? So my 50 should not have been able to kill him here. I should have needed 100 to kill him there. But I don't know. I hit some nerve, whatever, and boom, down the guy goes. I'm not liable because I, in a sense, accidentally on purpose killed him. Yes, I was attacking him with lethal force, but I did not strike him with lethal force. I struck him with non-lethal force where it hit. And then, bizarrely, it became lethal. So there was still an interruption between my intention and my execution. That's probably the wrong word in this case.
Yeah.
My intention and how it was carried out that creates enough of a gap that I am now a manslaughterer. I am not a murderer. I know, again, we have to have the primary point here is if we cannot make a 100% absolute causal chain between intent, how it was carried out, and the effect that was triggered by it, then we can't execute the person. And by the way, you're not. Okay, we might just have enough time. Okay, let's keep going.
Item B.
Because there's a counterpoint to all of this that's going to make you all really freak out. I guarantee it.
If he intended to strike an adult, and the blow was insufficient to kill an adult, but the blow landed on a child whom it was enough to kill, and he died, he is not liable.
All right, this is the same principle, and it probably turns our stomachs even
Yes.
more, right? I was throwing a rock at you, and for an adult, it wouldn't have killed you, but you ducked, and it hit the kid behind you, and the kid is weaker, and down goes the kid. Again, manslaughter, not murder. Even though I definitely was wielding an instrument of violence, it's still manslaughter.
If he intended to strike a child with a blow sufficient to kill a child, but struck an adult for whom it was insufficient to kill, and yet he died, he is not liable.
Again, same principle as the aim for the heart but hit lower, and a freak accident happens. It's a freak accident, and therefore manslaughter, not murder.
But if he intended to strike his loins with sufficient force to kill, but struck the heart instead, he is liable.
All right, I got 100 newtons of force going right for the low blow, and I miss and hit the heart instead. The blow began with intent to kill. It had sufficient energy to kill, and it hit and killed. Ding, ding, ding. I'm going to be executed. And similarly,
If he intended to strike an adult with a blow sufficient to kill an adult, but struck a child instead, and he died, he is liable.
I was trying to kill someone. I hit with enough force to kill someone. That someone died in a perfectly predictable manner. I'm a murderer, and therefore I will be treated accordingly.
Except Rabbi Shimon said, even if he intended to kill one but killed another, he is not liable.
All right, so Rabbi Shimon wants to raise the bar again higher. The sages say no. This is sufficient. We've made the bar pretty high already. This is murder. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, and we're going to see how this goes.
Wow.
Keep going.
And this is Mishnah 3.
Mishnah 3, thank you, yes.
If a murderer became mixed up with others, they are all exempted from the death penalty.
All right. This means we've got a convicted murderer, and they say, you know, your sentence is decapitation. You are definitely a murderer. And he says, you're never going to take me alive, and jumps out the window of the court and hides in a group of his, septuplets. So they're all identical, and we don't know which one of them was the actual murderer. I know it's pretty bizarre. Or, we can have somebody who is definitely, we're very sure was a murderer, but in some ways he's got himself mixed up with a group of people that we can't isolate which one was the murderer, that needs to be tried and then executed. What do you do?
Might this perhaps be someone who got mixed up with a group of criminals who had committed other crimes?
Sure.
Got mixed up with them. You can't tell which is the murderer, which is just the robber.
Absolutely. But you can't kill them. You can't kill all of them because they're not all guilty of a capital crime at the very least. So you just stuck. And again, this is what the Mishnah is trying to come to teach, that even though we want to serve justice, we can't serve justice at the risk of killing an innocent person, innocent at least of a capital crime. Rabbi Yehuda tries to come up with an alternative, which is, well, just lock them up until we figure it out. But even there are some commentators that are uncomfortable with that, because you are imprisoning, at least on the surface, innocent people along with a murderer. And that just doesn't seem fair to the innocent people, even if we can't tell which are which. Onward.
Okay, number 2, if a number of persons condemned to different type of sentences become mixed with one another, they are executed by the most lenient.
Okay, different case. And now you can all be happy if you want to kill people. We've got some people that are guilty of a crime that's worthy of being stoned. Some people that are guilty of a crime that's worthy of being decapitated. And they all get them mixed up. And we can't remember who was who. Whatever. Just go for the legal sense. Don't go for the real hypothetical. Well, what are we going to do? Well, they all need to be executed. That's the baseline. They're all supposed to be dead by the end of today anyway. So we kill them all by the most lenient form of death. In this particular case, that would be decapitation rather than stoning. And they're dead. Now, remember, we made a big deal out of the idea that it was the correct punishment for the correct crime and the person's admission of their guilt that was part of the atonement and the effectiveness of the execution on their own spiritual path. So we don't want to kill someone by the wrong way, but we definitely don't want to kill someone by the worst way. That would be worse. Executing somebody who didn't earn stoning by stoning is worse than executing someone who earned stoning and killing them instead by decapitation. Right? Again, we're not going to have a lesser criminal be punished with a greater punishment, even though the net effect, death, is the same. I know, whoever put so much thought and concern into prisoners and into criminals? The Torah did. And by extension, Judaism does, because they are still human beings, criminals or not. And it's a really important principle in Jewish law. Sinners are us. Right? They are humans. They are not a separate species. They are not a separate category of society. They are human beings. They are part of our community. And we have to treat them all the way up until the very end as human beings worthy of every right and respect and dignity, except freedom, because they have done such a heinous crime and are now guilty or now need to be executed. So apart from that, they are 100% our equals.
If criminals condemned to stoning become mixed up with others condemned to burning, Rabbi Shimon said they are stoned because burning is more severe. But the sages say they are burned because stoning is more severe.
Remember our argument about this? Way back at the very beginning of a couple chapters ago, about which type of execution is more severe. Well, here's where it becomes of practical importance. Knowing which one's more severe is going to make a difference of which one you do, should they be mixed up.
So Rabbi Shimon says to them, if burning were not more severe, it would not be decreed for a priest's adulterous daughter.
Right, which seems to be a upgrade of punishment, as it were.
They replied, if stoning were not more severe, it would not be the penalty of a blasphemer and an idolater. Right,
I mean, after all, that seems to be like one of the peak transgressions. So how would you say that burning is worse than that? The sages win, by the way.
If men condemned to decapitation become mixed up with others condemned to strangling, Rabbi Shimon said they are all decapitated, and the sages say they are all strangled.
Again, their argument carries over, but the basic analysis is they should be punished with the least severe form. Of course, in this, the net effect is the same. They're dead. Okay. Well, I wanted to, because I know you're heading back up to Boston,
Yes.
so we're not quite going to get it. But
That's all right.
but Sanhedrin 9:5 is going to introduce a very interesting idea, which is we have somebody who is guilty of murder by every possible bit of evidence and proof, except we don't have the witnesses to actually convict them, right? It's just, this is the 99.99999% certainty of their guilt. What do? You can't execute them because you don't have the proof. And we'll talk about this more next week for our local class, but I wanted you to go away knowing that our sages were also troubled that there were certain exceptional cases when we couldn't execute an obvious and blatant criminal. And so what they did was they kept them in prison and they fed them a certain mixture of barley and water until their stomach burst. Because they didn't kill them then,
They didn't kill them.
right? The food killed them. Got to watch what you eat. And throughout Jewish history, and again, we'll talk about this more next week, but I wanted you to know that
Yes.
the rabbis as well were struggling with certain special cases. Throughout Jewish history, there have been times when extrajudicial activity was taken in order to meet the broader needs of justice. It was very limited, very rare, but we'll be talking about that more next week, and you can watch on YouTube.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Something to think about on your drive back.
Yes.
But those are good questions for the car conversation.
Oh,
When you're driving for 18 hours.
You're gonna do something.
All right. So what do you think we should do in a case like this?
Well, something like these things must have come up